At 2:30 p.m. on May 27, 1943, Second Lieutenant Louis Zamperini felt the B-24 Liberator bomber shudder violently as the number 2 engine failed 850 miles north of the Hawaiian Islands. The aircraft, nicknamed Green Hornet, was on a search mission for a missing bomber crew. The plane was already a mechanical nightmare, stripped from another squadron because it had logged too many combat hours and suffered too many maintenance issues. Every crew that flew Green Hornet called it a death trap. Nobody wanted to fly it. Zamperini's regular plane was down for repairs. They had no choice. The engine failure at 800 feet altitude gave the crew approximately 40 seconds before impact. Standard procedure for ditching a B-24 over open ocean required crew coordination, proper positioning, and 2,000 feet of altitude to execute safely. Green Hornet had none of those things. The plane dropped nose first into the Pacific Ocean at approximately 200 miles per hour, slamming into the water with force that tore the aircraft apart. 8 men were aboard. 3 survived the initial impact. 2 would survive the next 47 days. Louis Zamperini, who had run the 5,000 meters at the 1936 Berlin Olympics while Adolf Hitler watched, who had been called the fastest high school miler in American history, who had trained for the 1940 Olympics that never happened because of the war, was about to face an endurance test that made Olympic competition seem trivial. 47 days on a life raft with no food, minimal water, constant shark attacks, and Japanese strafing. Then 2 years in Japanese POW camps, where a sadistic guard nicknamed the Bird would torture him daily, trying to break him completely. Standard survival estimates for men adrift in the Pacific with no supplies said 14 days maximum before death from dehydration and exposure. The longest documented survival at sea had been 34 days by British sailors in 1942. Zamperini would exceed both numbers while fighting off tiger sharks, surviving aerial attacks, and maintaining sanity in conditions designed to destroy the human mind. In the years after the war, after he returned to America broken by trauma and rage, after he descended into alcoholism and violence, after he planned to return to Japan to murder the man who tortured him, Louis Zamperini would make a choice that defined him more than Olympic medals or survival records. He would choose forgiveness over revenge. He would return to Japan in 1950 to meet his former captors, not with violence, but with compassion. He would carry the Olympic torch through Nagano, Japan, in 1998 at age 81, running past the camp where he'd been tortured, proving that the human spirit could not be destroyed. If you want to see how an Olympic runner survived the impossible and chose forgiveness over hatred, hit that like button. It helps us share these stories of resilience that inspired best-selling books and Hollywood films. Subscribe if you haven't already, because we're diving into the true story that Laura Hillenbrand called Unbroken. Back to May 1943 and the crash that began 47 Days of Hell. Louis Sylvie Zamperini was born on January 26, 1917, in Olean, New York, to Italian immigrant parents. His father, Anthony Zamperini, worked as a coal miner and railroad electrician. His mother, Louise, managed the household and raised 4 children. In 1919, seeking better opportunities and warmer climate, the family moved to Torrance, California, a small town south of Los Angeles. Young Louis was a troublemaker from the start. He spoke only Italian until starting school, struggled with English, and was bullied by other students for his accent and small size. He responded to bullying with his fists, starting fights with anyone who challenged him. By age 12, he was stealing from neighbors, breaking into houses, and running from police. He smoked cigarettes stolen from stores, drank alcohol stolen from bootleggers, and seemed destined for juvenile detention, or worse. His older brother Pete, recognizing that Louis's energy and aggression needed productive outlet, convinced him to join the high school track team in 1932. Louis, then 15 years old, had natural speed but no discipline. He hated training, skipped practices, and cared more about girls and mischief than running. Pete forced him to continue, literally chasing Louis through the streets to make him train, understanding that athletics might save his brother from prison. The transformation happened gradually. Louis discovered he was naturally gifted at distance running. His lungs, strengthened by years of running from police and rivals, could handle the sustained effort. His legs, developed by constant movement, had endurance most teenage runners couldn't match. His competitive nature, previously channeled into fighting, found new outlet in beating other runners. By 1933, at age 16, Louis was winning local races and catching attention from college coaches. In 1934, his senior year at Torrance High School, Louis ran a mile in 4 minutes 21.2 seconds, setting a national high school record that would stand for 20 years. The performance made him the fastest high school miler in American history. College scholarship offers arrived from across the country. He chose the University of Southern California, staying close to home while training for the 1936 Olympics. The 1936 Olympics in Berlin represented opportunity and pressure. Louis, age 19, was the youngest distance runner on the American team. He competed in the 5,000 meters, a race of 12.5 laps around the track, requiring both speed and endurance. The field included the best distance runners from 30 countries. Louis' goal was simply to avoid embarrassment, to finish respectably, to gain experience for the 1940 Olympics, where he planned to win gold. The final was held on August 7, 1936. In front of 110,000 spectators, including Adolf Hitler and other Nazi leadership. Louis ran strategically, conserving energy during the first 2 miles, moving up gradually through the field. With 2 laps remaining, he was in 8th place, 30 yards behind the leaders. Standard tactics said, maintain position, finish in the top 8, save the sprint for when you're older and stronger. Louis ignored standard tactics. With 800 meters remaining, he accelerated, passing 2 runners. With 400 meters remaining, he was in 5th place, still 20 yards behind the medal positions. With 200 meters remaining, his legs burning from lactic acid buildup, he sprinted at full speed, passing 2 more runners to finish 8th overall. His final lap was completed in 56 seconds, a speed that astonished observers and earned him recognition as a future champion. After the race, Adolf Hitler requested to meet the American runners. Louis shook hands with Hitler, an encounter he would later describe as surreal and disturbing. Hitler's grip was weak, his eyes were unsettling, and Louis left the meeting convinced the German leader was dangerous. That conviction would prove prescient when Hitler started World War II 3 years later. Louis returned to USC and continued training for the 1940 Olympics scheduled for Tokyo. By 1940, he was running miles consistently under 4 minutes 10 seconds. Among the fastest in the world. He was projected to win gold in either the 1,500 meters or 5,000 meters. But in September 1939, Germany invaded Poland, and the 1940 Olympics were canceled. Louis's Olympic dreams ended. He graduated from USC in 1940, worked briefly in various jobs, and wondered what to do with his life now that his primary goal was impossible. When Japan attacked Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, Louis enlisted in the Army Air Forces, volunteering for aircrew duty. The military needed bombardiers, the crew members who operated the Norden bomb site and released bombs on targets. The job required mathematical skill, steady nerves under fire, and ability to perform complex calculations while people were shooting at you. Louis qualified and was sent to bombardier school at Midland, Texas, graduating in 1942 as a second lieutenant. The Army assigned him to the 372nd Bombardier Squadron, 307th Bombardment Group, flying B-24 Liberator heavy bombers in the Pacific Theater. The B-24 was a 4-engine bomber with reputation for being difficult to fly, but capable of long-range missions that no other American bomber could execute. It was nicknamed the Flying Coffin by some crews because it was vulnerable to fighters and difficult to escape if damaged. Technical specifications of the B-24 Liberator explain both its capabilities and dangers. Wingspan, 110 feet, length 67 feet, height 18 feet, powered by 4 Pratt & Whitney R1830 radial engines, each producing 1,200 horsepower, maximum speed 290 miles per hour, cruising speed 215 miles per hour, range 2,100 miles with normal bomb load, crew of 10, pilot, co-pilot, bombardier, navigator, radio operator, flight engineer, and 4 gunners. Armament consisted of 10 50 caliber machine guns and bomb load up to 8,000 pounds. The aircraft was vulnerable to enemy fighters due to relatively slow speed and large size. It was vulnerable to mechanical failure because the four engines required constant maintenance and frequently malfunctioned. Combat losses were approximately 5% per mission in the Pacific, meaning crews that survived 20 missions were lucky. Louis' squadron flew missions against Japanese installations in the Marshall Islands, Wake Island, and Tarawa. By May 1943, he had flown numerous combat missions and survived several encounters with Japanese fighters. On May 27, 1943, Zamperini's crew was assigned to search for a missing B-24 that had crashed somewhere in the Pacific north of Hawaii. The search mission didn't require their regular bomber. Instead, they were given Green Hornet, a B-24D that every crew avoided because of mechanical problems. The plane had over 200 combat hours, far exceeding recommended limits. Multiple engines had been replaced. The airframe had stress cracks. But operational requirements meant the mission had to fly, and Green Hornet was the only available aircraft. The crew of 11 took off from Oahu at 12:30 p.m., flying north toward the last known position of the missing bomber. For 2 hours, the flight was routine. Then, at 2:28 p.m., the number one engine began losing power. The pilot, First Lieutenant Russell Phillips, feathered the propeller and prepared to abort the mission. But at 2:30 p.m., before Phillips could turn the aircraft toward home, the number two engine failed catastrophically, the propeller separating from the engine and spinning away. A B-24 could fly on two engines under ideal conditions, but Green Hornet was at 800 feet altitude, carrying full fuel load and losing speed rapidly. Phillips had approximately 40 seconds before the aircraft would stall and fall into the ocean. He needed 2,000 feet of altitude to execute proper ditching procedure. He had 800 feet and decreasing rapidly. The mathematics said they were going to crash hard. Phillips shouted over the intercom for crew to brace for impact. Zamperini, in the bombardier position in the nose, grabbed onto structure and pulled his legs up to avoid the impact zone. The aircraft hit the water nose first at approximately 200 miles per hour. The impact was catastrophic. The nose shattered, water rushed in instantly, and the aircraft began sinking immediately. Zamperini found himself underwater, trapped in wreckage, unsure which direction was up. He felt metal cables wrapped around his legs, holding him down. He reached down and untangled himself, then swam toward light. He surfaced approximately 20 seconds after impact, gasping for air, looking for other survivors. The aircraft had already sunk, disappearing beneath the surface in less than 30 seconds. Only debris remained floating on the water. He spotted two other survivors, pilot Russell Phillips and tail, gunner Francis McNamara. The three men clung to debris and looked for life rafts. Two life rafts, small inflatable boats designed to hold 3 men each, had deployed during the crash. The survivors climbed into the rafts, performed head count, and realized 8 men had died in the crash, either killed by impact or trapped in the sinking aircraft. The inventory of their supplies was devastating. 2 life rafts, each approximately 8 feet long and 4 feet wide. 6 bars of chocolate, 8 flares, no fishing equipment, no water, no knife, no compass. The chocolate would last perhaps 4 days if rationed carefully. After that, they would have nothing. Standard survival estimates said men could live 3 weeks without food, but only 3 days without water. In the middle of the Pacific Ocean, surrounded by water, they couldn't drink. Dehydration would kill them within days, unless they could collect rainwater. The survivors took stock of their situation. They were approximately 850 miles north of Hawaii, far from any shipping lanes, in a search area so vast that finding them would require extraordinary luck. The life rafts were bright yellow, visible from aircraft, but aircraft searching for them would have to fly directly over their position to spot them. The Pacific Ocean covers 63 million square miles. The odds of being found were essentially zero. The first day was spent organizing their minimal supplies and assessing injuries. Phillips had bruised ribs from the crash impact. McNamara had internal injuries that caused him to cough blood. Zamperini had cuts and bruises, but was functional. They divided the chocolate into 21 pieces, planning to eat 1 piece per person per day for 7 days. After that, they would have nothing. The calculation was simple and terrifying. 7 days of minimal calories, then starvation. Day 2 brought the first real understanding of their situation. The sun rose at approximately 6 a.m., turning the life raft into an oven by 9 a.m. The yellow rubber absorbed heat, temperatures inside the raft reaching 110 degrees Fahrenheit or higher. They had no shade, no way to cool themselves except by splashing salt water on their bodies. But salt water increased dehydration through evaporation and left salt residue that caused skin irritation. They were trapped between overheating and accelerating dehydration. The nights were equally brutal but opposite. As the sun set, temperatures dropped rapidly. By midnight, air temperature was approximately 50 degrees Fahrenheit, but wind chill and their wet clothing made effective temperature feel much colder. They had no blankets, no dry clothes, nothing to provide warmth. They huddled together for shared body heat, shivering violently, unable to sleep more than a few minutes at a time. Day 3 brought rain, the first since the crash. Dark clouds built during the afternoon, and by 4 p.m., heavy rain was falling. They opened their mouths to catch water, the first fresh water they'd tasted in 3 days. The relief was extraordinary. Their throats were so dry they could barely swallow. Their lips were cracked and bleeding. The rain lasted approximately 20 minutes, providing enough water to temporarily relieve their dehydration. They tried to collect water in the raft, but had no containers. Most of the rain ran off or mixed with salt water in the bottom of the raft. Day 4 brought despair. McNamara, in a moment of panic or confusion, ate all the remaining chocolate during the night while the others slept. When Phillips and Zamperini woke and discovered what he'd done, they were furious. The chocolate represented their only food source. McNamara's action might have killed all 3 of them. But anger was useless. The chocolate was gone. They were now completely without food. Day 5 brought the first serious discussion of death. They talked about their families, what they wanted their families to know if only some of them survived. They made promises to each other. If one survived, he would tell the others' families what happened. Phillips asked Zamperini to tell his wife that he loved her and thought of her until the end. Zamperini made the same request regarding his family. Day 6 brought the first fish. A small pilot fish, approximately 6 inches long, had been following the raft since day 3. These fish typically follow larger objects in the ocean, feeding on parasites and scraps. McNamara, despite his weakness and the others' anger about the chocolate, reached into the water and grabbed the fish with his bare hands. The fish struggled, but he held on. They killed it by breaking its spine, then divided it into 3 equal portions. They ate it raw, chewing carefully, eating fins, bones, organs, everything. The taste was unpleasant, slightly oily with blood flavor, but it was food. It provided perhaps 100 calories total, divided among 3 men, barely enough to matter metabolically, but psychologically crucial. Day 7 through day 12 established the pattern that would sustain them. They watched for fish, particularly pilot fish and small mackerel that approached the raft. When a fish came close enough, one of them would slowly reach into the water and attempt to grab it. The technique required patience and quickness. Move too fast, and the fish would dart away. Move too slow, and you couldn't grab it before it escaped. Success rate was approximately 1 fish caught per 3 attempts. On good days, they caught 2 fish. On bad days, they caught none. The albatrosses provided another food source. Large seabirds with wingspans exceeding 6 feet would occasionally land on the raft or fly close enough to reach. On day 14, an albatross landed on the edge of Phillips's raft. Zamperini slowly reached out and grabbed its leg. The bird struggled violently, beating him with its wings, but he held on. He killed the bird by wringing its neck, then used his teeth to tear open its body. They ate, the meat raw, tough, and fishy, but providing significant calories. They used the intestines as bait for fishing, attracting larger fish that previously ignored their hands. The bird provided food for 2 days. Day 16 brought another Japanese bomber attack. The same or similar twin-engine Betty bomber appeared suddenly at low altitude, circling once before descending to strafe them. This time, they were prepared. As soon as the bomber banked toward them, they rolled into the water on the side away from the bomber's approach, diving deep. Bullets stitched the water above them, visible as white streaks through the blue water. They stayed submerged until their lungs burned, approximately 30 seconds, then surfaced carefully to breathe before diving again. The attack lasted about 2 minutes. The bomber made 3 strafing runs before departing. Both rafts were hit multiple times, requiring hours of patching. The sharks were constant threat. Tiger sharks, some exceeding 15 feet in length, circled the rafts continuously. Several times, sharks bumped the rafts from below, testing whether the rafts were edible. Once, a shark bit into the side of Phillips's raft, puncturing it. Phillips repaired the leak using a patch kit from the raft's survival equipment. The men used oars to hit sharks that approached too closely, but the thin aluminum oars barely deterred the massive predators. On the 8th day, a Japanese bomber, a twin-engine Mitsubishi G4M Betty, flew directly over their position. The survivors waved frantically, hoping for rescue even from the enemy. The bomber circled once, then descended and began strafing them with machine gun fire. The 3 men jumped into the water and dove deep as bullets tore into the rafts, puncturing them multiple times. The attack lasted approximately 40 seconds. Then the bomber flew away. They climbed back into the damaged rafts and spent hours patching the bullet holes. One raft was so badly damaged it could barely hold air. They abandoned it, all 3 men cramming into the remaining raft designed for 3 people. The space was barely adequate. They had to sit pressed against each other, unable to lie down, unable to move without disturbing the others. Francis McNamara, the youngest of the 3 at age 23, deteriorated rapidly. He had been injured during the crash, suffering internal injuries that caused constant pain. He couldn't fish effectively, couldn't help patch the rafts, and spent most of his time lying motionless, growing weaker daily. On the 33rd day at sea, McNamara died. Zamperini and Phillips wrapped his body in fabric and lowered him into the water, saying prayers as sharks immediately took the body. By day 40, Zamperini and Phillips were skeletons. Zamperini had lost approximately 80 pounds from his pre-crash weight of 155 pounds. His weight was approximately 75 pounds. Phillips was similar. They had open sores covering their bodies from saltwater exposure. Their lips were cracked and bleeding. They had dysentery from drinking occasional rainwater, contaminated with seawater. They were barely conscious most of the time, drifting in and out of awareness. On day 47, July 13th, 1943, they spotted land. A small atoll, later identified as part of the Marshall Islands, appeared on the horizon. They paddled weakly toward it, reaching the shore after several hours. Japanese soldiers were waiting on the beach, having spotted the raft approaching. Zamperini and Phillips, too weak to resist, were captured immediately and taken to a military outpost. The Japanese interrogated them briefly, then transported them to Kwajalein Atoll, a major Japanese naval base. The base commander placed them in a small concrete cell called the punishment cell, or the pigsty, by prisoners, a space approximately 6 feet by 6 feet, with no windows and minimal ventilation. They were kept there for 42 days, receiving minimal food, no medical treatment, and frequent beatings. During interrogation, Japanese officers wanted information about American bomber tactics, bases, and planned operations. Zamperini and Phillips provided only name, rank, and serial number, as required by Geneva Convention. The interrogators responded with beatings using fists, clubs, and rifle butts. Zamperini suffered cracked ribs, facial injuries, and possible skull fracture. Despite the brutality, he never provided tactical information. In September 1943, they were transferred to Ofuna, a secret interrogation center near Tokyo. Ofuna was not an official POW camp. Prisoners held there had no connection to the Red Cross, received no mail, and officially did not exist. The facility was operated by Japanese naval intelligence for interrogating captured air crew and submarine personnel. Conditions were deliberately harsh to break prisoners' resistance. At Ofuna, Zamperini met other captured American air crew who had been held for months or years. They told him the key to survival was maintaining mental discipline, helping fellow prisoners, and never showing weakness to guards. They warned him about particular guards known for brutality, but nobody warned him about Mutsuhiro Watanabe because Watanabe hadn't yet been assigned to Ofuna. Corporal Mutsuhiro Watanabe, who would become known to prisoners as the Bird, arrived at Ofuna in early 1944. Watanabe was a corporal despite coming from a wealthy Japanese family and having attended Waseda University, one of Japan's most prestigious institutions. He had failed the examination for officer candidate school twice, a humiliation that left him bitter and angry. He compensated for his perceived failure by exercising absolute power over prisoners who couldn't fight back. Watanabe was 27 years old, approximately 5 feet 9 inches tall, weighing about 140 pounds. He had a thin face, dark eyes that prisoners described as showing no emotion, and hands that were surprisingly strong despite his slight build. He carried a leather belt that he used as a weapon, striking prisoners across the face or body with the metal buckle. The belt became his signature, and prisoners learned to recognize the sound of him approaching by the belt buckle jingling against his uniform. Watanabe fixated on Zamperini almost immediately. Whether it was Zamperini's Olympic background, his defiant attitude, or simply random selection, Watanabe chose Zamperini as his primary target for daily beatings. The brutality followed patterns designed to break prisoners psychologically, while leaving no permanent marks that would violate official regulations. Watanabe understood that physical scars healed, but psychological damage was permanent. The beam exercise was Watanabe's favorite torture method. He would force Zamperini to lift a heavy wooden beam, approximately 6 feet long and weighing about 40 pounds, and hold it above his head with arms fully extended. Zamperini had to maintain this position for hours, sometimes as long as 3 hours. The pain started in the shoulders after about 10 minutes. Sharp burning sensation as muscles fatigued. After 20 minutes, the arms began shaking from exhaustion. After 30 minutes, the pain was excruciating, spreading from shoulders through the entire upper body. If Zamperini's arms dropped even slightly, Watanabe would beat him. The beating would continue until Zamperini raised the beam back to proper position. Then he would have to hold it again, arms already exhausted from the previous effort, making each subsequent hold shorter and more painful. The exercise typically ended with Zamperini's arms dropping involuntarily from complete muscle failure, the beam falling to the ground, and Watanabe beating him for failing to complete the exercise. The standing punishment was equally brutal, but simpler. Watanabe would order Zamperini to stand at rigid attention in a specific location, sometimes inside a building, sometimes outside in full sun or rain for entire days. From sunrise to sunset, Zamperini would stand motionless. If he moved, shifted his weight, or showed any sign of discomfort, Watanabe would beat him and order him to continue standing. The punishment seemed simple, but was psychologically devastating. Standing motionless for 12 to 14 hours while watching other prisoners move freely, eat meals, and rest created profound mental anguish in addition to physical pain. Watanabe also employed random violence designed to create constant fear. He would walk through the camp seemingly calm, then suddenly punch prisoners in the face without warning or provocation. Zamperini was hit this way dozens of times. The unpredictability was intentional. Prisoners could never relax because violence could come at any moment from any direction. The constant vigilance required to avoid Watanabe's attention was mentally exhausting. The food deprivation added another layer of torture. Standard rations at Ofuna were barely sufficient to sustain life. Each prisoner received 2 meals daily, consisting primarily of rice with occasional vegetables or thin soup. Total daily calories were approximately 800 to 1,000. Insufficient for men performing physical labor. Watanabe would further reduce Zamperini's rations as punishment, sometimes cutting his food by half for days at a time. Zamperini's weight dropped from approximately 165 pounds before the war to approximately 110 pounds by late 1944. The solitary confinement punishment was perhaps the worst psychologically. Watanabe would place Zamperini in a small wooden box, approximately 4 feet by 4 feet by 4 feet, barely large enough to sit in, for days at a time. The box had small ventilation holes, but no light. Zamperini would sit in complete darkness, unable to stand or lie down properly for 2 or 3 days. Water was provided once daily. Food was provided every other day. The sensory deprivation combined with physical discomfort created hallucinations and severe psychological distress. Other prisoners noticed that Watanabe targeted Zamperini with unusual intensity. Some believed it was because of Zamperini's Olympic fame. Japanese culture valued athletic achievement, and having an Olympic athlete under his control might have given Watanabe a sense of power he lacked elsewhere in his life. The Japanese propaganda machine had used the 1936 Berlin Olympics to promote Japanese athletic superiority. Having an American Olympian as a powerless prisoner might have satisfied Watanabe's need for validation. Others believed Watanabe simply enjoyed breaking strong men. Zamperini's defiant attitude, his refusal to show fear or submission even during beatings, made him the perfect target. Watanabe would beat him until he fell, then order him to stand and beat him again. This cycle would continue until Zamperini literally could not stand. Even then, Zamperini would maintain eye contact with Watanabe, refusing to look away or show submission. This defiance infuriated Watanabe, but also seemed to fascinate him. One incident in late 1944 demonstrated the psychological complexity of Watanabe's cruelty. He ordered all prisoners to write letters to their families for delivery through the Red Cross. The prisoners were excited, believing they could finally communicate with loved ones who had been told they were dead. Zamperini wrote a careful letter to his family, describing that he was alive, in good health, and hoping for reunion after the war. The letter followed all censorship rules, contained no military information, and was purely personal. After collecting the letters, Watanabe stood before the assembled prisoners and burned all the letters in a metal drum, forcing the prisoners to watch. He explained that the letters would never be sent, that the exercise was designed to remind prisoners that they had no connection to the outside world, that their families still believed they were dead, and that Watanabe controlled every aspect of their existence. The psychological impact was devastating. Several prisoners broke down crying. Zamperini maintained his composure, but later described this as one of the cruelest things Watanabe ever did. In 1945, as Allied bombing of Japan intensified, prisoners at Ofuna were transferred to other camps. Zamperini was sent to Naoetsu, a camp on the west coast of Japan, in February 1945. By horrible coincidence, Watanabe was also transferred to Naoetsu, where he resumed tormenting Zamperini with even greater brutality. At Naoetsu, prisoners were forced to work in a factory and coal mines, despite Geneva Convention prohibitions against forced labor. Zamperini, weakened by years of captivity and malnutrition, struggled to meet work quotas. Watanabe beat him daily for failing to work fast enough. On one occasion, Watanabe forced all 200 prisoners at Naoetsu to line up and punch Zamperini in the face. Each prisoner, including Zamperini's friends who didn't want to hit him, was forced to punch him or face beating themselves. The ordeal lasted over an hour, leaving Zamperini's face swollen and bleeding. By August 1945, Zamperini weighed approximately 110 pounds, had dysentery, and was suffering from what would later be diagnosed as severe post-traumatic stress disorder. When the atomic bombs were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Japanese guards told prisoners nothing. When Japan surrendered on August 15, 1945, the guards disappeared overnight. American aircraft dropped supplies to POW camps on August 20th. Zamperini was liberated and evacuated to American military hospitals on Okinawa, then transported to hospitals in the United States. He returned to Torrance, California in October 1945 as a hero. His family had presumed him dead after the B-24 crash, having received official notification in June 1943 that he was missing and presumed killed in action. When news reached them in September 1945 that he had survived, the reunion was emotional beyond description. But the man who returned was not the confident Olympic runner who had left. He was broken, traumatized, and filled with rage. The post-war years were dark. Zamperini drank heavily, trying to suppress memories of captivity. He married Cynthia Applewhite in 1946, hoping marriage would provide stability. Instead, his rage and alcoholism nearly destroyed the marriage. He had violent nightmares where he attacked his wife, believing she was a Japanese guard. He planned to return to Japan and find Watanabe to kill him with his bare hands. He drank to blackout most nights, trying to forget the beatings, the starvation, the helplessness. In 1949, his wife convinced him to attend a Billy Graham crusade in Los Angeles. Zamperini reluctantly attended, expecting nothing. But during Graham's sermon about forgiveness and redemption, something changed. Zamperini made a decision that night. He would forgive his captors, including Watanabe. He would release his rage and hatred. He would stop drinking and rebuild his life. The transformation was immediate and permanent. Zamperini stopped drinking that night and never drank again. He devoted himself to working with troubled youth, using his story to show that recovery from trauma was possible. He spoke at schools, churches, and prisons, telling young people that regardless of their background or mistakes, they could change their lives through determination and purpose. In 1950, Zamperini returned to Japan as part of Christian missionary organization. He visited Sugamo prison, where many of his former captors were held as war criminals. He met with the guards who had beaten him at Ofuna and Naoitsu, extending forgiveness to each one. Most were shocked that a former prisoner would return not seeking revenge, but offering forgiveness. Several guards broke down crying when Zamperini shook their hands and told them he bore no grudge. He tried to meet Watanabe, but was unsuccessful. Watanabe, learning that war crimes charges might be filed against him, had disappeared after the war, hiding from authorities. He was never prosecuted. He emerged from hiding in the 1950s when the statute of limitations expired, living quietly in Tokyo until his death in 2003 at age 97. He refused multiple interview requests from journalists and never expressed remorse for his actions. Zamperini continued his work with youth through the 1950s and 1960s, establishing Victory Boys Camp in California, a program for troubled boys combining athletics, discipline, and mentorship. He worked with thousands of young people over 4 decades, many of whom credited him with changing their lives. His message was consistent. Determination could overcome any obstacle. Forgiveness was stronger than hatred, and purpose gave life meaning. In 1998, at age 81, Zamperini was invited to carry the Olympic torch through Nagano, Japan, as part of the Winter Olympics torch relay. The route passed near Naoitsu, the camp where he had been tortured. Running that route while carrying the Olympic torch, representing the spirit of competition and international cooperation, completing the Olympic journey that war had interrupted, was deeply meaningful. Japanese citizens who watched him run wept, knowing his story, seeing his grace and lack of bitterness. Laura Hillenbrand's biography, Unbroken, published in 2010, brought Zamperini's story to millions of readers worldwide. The book became an instant bestseller, remaining on the New York Times bestseller list for over 4 years. It was adapted into a feature film directed by Angelina Jolie, released in 2014. Zamperini consulted on the film, but did not live to see its theatrical release. He died on July 2, 2014, at age 97, surrounded by family. His legacy extends beyond survival and forgiveness. He proved that human beings could endure conditions that should have killed them. 47 days at sea exceeded all previous survival records. 2 years of daily torture and brutality broke many prisoners completely, but didn't. Break Zamperini. His choice to forgive rather than hate demonstrated that we are not defined by what happens to us, but by how we respond to what happens. May 27, 1943, lasted 47 days on a raft and 2 years in prison camps that should have destroyed Louis Zamperini. 1 Olympic runner, 1 crashed bomber, 1 sadistic guard, 1 impossible choice to forgive. When endurance exceeded human limits, when forgiveness conquered hatred, when one man's story proved that the human spirit is truly unbroken. Louis Sylvie Zamperini, Olympic runner, B-24 bombardier, survived 47 days at sea, survived 2 years of torture, chose forgiveness over revenge, worked with troubled youth for 40 years, carried Olympic torch through Japan at age 81, lived to 97, proved that we are unbroken, not because suffering didn't touch him, because he refused to let it define him. If this story moved you, please like and subscribe. Your support preserves these histories of resilience that inspired the world. Tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? We honor those who proved that forgiveness is the ultimate victory. Thank you for keeping their stories alive.